So in 1983, Toyota New Zealand got a new CEO, and I can't remember what this guy's name was, but he was 35 years old. And his goal was to topple Ford and make Toyota the #1 selling vehicle in New Zealand. And the rationale or the objective that he had, or the mechanism by which to do that was, if we want New Zealanders to buy Toyotas, we've got to make Toyotas part of New Zealand. And so that led to a whole bunch of thinking that ultimately resulted in these. So the 7th generation Corolla came out in 1983, but I think in New Zealand it was 1984. And the GT model debuted here in 1985, which is why we went to a 40th anniversary event at Easter for them. If you think back to 1985, we still had leaded fuel. And most of the cars that were sold in New Zealand were basically UK spec, because the fuel and a few other things that we got here was very similar to UK. And so that's why, so when you look at things like the AE86 Corolla, the rear-wheel drive 16 valve, the ones sold here are virtually identical to the UK models. The Starium turbos that were sold here was sold as an FX GT, was sold globally. They were sold in North America, they were sold in Africa, South Africa, they were sold in Europe. But most countries got the 3-door hatchback version. Japan, FX GT, UK, Corolla GT, and it was I think it was the Corolla GTS in Europe and the States and Canada. But they all had the same sort of spec, the 4AGE 1600 16 valve engine and so on. So in 1985, because of the local content and the local build, the goal was to launch the GT in New Zealand. They say the model came out, the generation of Corolla in 1983, had a 4-year lifespan, and 2 years into it, they facelifted them. So in late 85, it went through a facelift. And the difference between the pre-facelift and the facelift is basically the grille, the side indicators, and they're shorter, and so the guard's slightly different. And the grille is more, I guess you say, a more row of lines rather than the 3 sort of bar one. Other than that, they're much the same. But the big difference with the Corolla GT was the pre-facelift cars were only hatchbacks, and they were more or less the same as the UK spec. For the facelift, they decided that there was a market in New Zealand for a 5-door liftback. New Zealand ended up being the only country in the world that got a 5-door liftback GT. The South Africans got effectively a similar car, but it was never called a Corolla GT. For the facelift, they upped the New Zealand content of them. So whilst the engine, the gearbox, all those sorts of mechanicals were much the same as anywhere else, there was a lot of development done. So Chris Amon was called in to do the suspension. So if you go back to, there was the motoring show he used to do with Dougal Stevenson, and he was famous in, I don't know, 82 or thereabouts, for testing the 70 series Corolla, last of the rear-wheel drives, the DX Corolla, and absolutely hammering it, or panning it for its poor performance. That led to Toyota New Zealand ringing him up and saying, we want to talk to you about this. And effectively, what would you do differently? And he sort of said, well, I'll start with, I'll put some anti-roll bars on it, and I'd change the springs and the shocks and so on and so forth. Toyota New Zealand did that. Toyota Japan got wind of it and sort of said, well, what are you doing? Came out and took the New Zealand modified Corolla and the Japanese spec one for a drive, came back, and all the Corollas got the New Zealand modifications as a result. So by that stage, when these were starting and being in development, Chris Amon was, helping with Toyota on a ad hoc basis. And so as part of Toyota's plan to put the, New Zealand into the car, they engaged him to tune the suspension. They engaged Jan Beck, who was a fashion consultant, to do the interior. And the facelift differs from the pre-facelift in the amount of New Zealand content. So if you look at them globally, the headlights are different, the indicators are different, or, the grille. But the New Zealand new facelifts all got a front lip spoiler. These were the only ones in the car in the world to come with a front lip spoiler. It was developed in a wind tunnel by DSIR. it's got little brake cooling vents in it. It's also got the brake cooling ducts behind the front spoiler. And if you have a look, you can see them in the wheel arches. They were built locally by a couple of school teachers who had a sideline business making fiberglass products, and they got the contract to do these. So the leather, the seats, the interiors were done, made in New Zealand. There's a whole bunch of New Zealand content. But one of the other curious things was the actual wheels. So the pre-facelift cars have a wheel that looks identical until you look closely at it. And it's actually, it's a Japanese wheel, although they weren't sold in Japan on the cars. And they're a two-piece rim with a car centre, spun rim, and they're welded together. These wheels are made in New Zealand by Cheviot. And the story goes that Toyota had a very high quality standard for those wheels that Cheviot really struggled to meet because it was a much higher standard than the Australian New Zealand standard for the wheels. But they got there. And this is where it starts to get interesting, so there you are, you're making wheels in New Zealand. You've got someone called Chris Amon that has set up the suspension, and he specified apparently spring shocks, sway bars for them. And his emphasis was on ride quality and overall sort of handling and a balance rather than outright performance. And he nailed it very well. It's a very supple car. One of the interesting things is the 5-door liftback has a 14 by, I think it's 5-inch rim, whereas the 3-door hatchback, it's a 14 by 5.5-inch rim. So they also apparently changed the offset in them. So this is all the fine tuning that they did. And the wheels are one piece. Interestingly enough, when we cleaned these wheels up, and it's got the original 5, and we put new tyres on, we got them balanced, the tyre shop was stunned at how little balance weight they took, despite being, in this case, a 38-year-old rim. Because of that high quality standard, the evenness of the moulding and all the rest of it was much higher than normal. So coming back to it, the wheels were made in New Zealand and are different. The front air dams, say, only in New Zealand. The exhausts were in New Zealand because they did not make this as the shell as GT anywhere else. There's curious things. The 5-door came with power steering. The 3-door didn't have power steering. Aircon was an option for an extra $3,000. What did that mean? Apparently, this is a February '87 car. They made in 1986. Apparently, this was $38,000 new. The 3-door was $32,000. They're much the same, other than the power steer. So quite how there's the $6,000 difference in the cost otherwise is curious. $38,000 in 1986 is $112,000 today. So you think about, I don't know what the GR Corolla is, but it's nowhere near $112,000. So, for the time, these were very expensive. They built circa 183 of the liftbacks and around about 380 of the hatchbacks. They made about 2 or 3 extras as sort of pre-production. They were just a body shell coming off the line that they then put the GT running gear into. So they've all the GTs have a little tag here. Well, some it's here, some it's over there, which is welded on, which actually has the build number in it. So this is number 82 of the 180 odd liftbacks that were built. They built around about 500 all up, loosely 1/3 liftback, 2/3 hatchbacks. And at the reunion at Easter, there was about 24, 25 cars there, and it was loosely about 1/3, 2/3 representation. So that's carried through to the day. They were built in batches of 20, by all accounts, over that period of time. So that was, I think, pretty much the things that make this sort of interesting. Izzy, did you want to add to that part of it? Yes. So the body tag and the likes has very little detail on it because it was generic, because it pressed in Japan with the firewall. And also, what was interesting at the reunion was one of the guys there, he didn't have the car there, but he had number 81. So 81 is similarly the same green, and it's literally the car built before this is a GT, but it's five body numbers different. So there's all these little quirks to do with it. The other thing is, if you look at the sales information for them, it nowhere mentions the radio, and there's no photographs of where the radio sits in the car because they weren't provided with one. And so despite being $38,000 and the most expensive Corolla by far, it's got manual locking, hand crank windows, so power steer, no aircon, and it didn't come with a radio. So that was like a dealer kind of supplied accessory. And this car, we put an Alpine unit in it, but it actually had what we think is the original stereo in it. That was a little Sanyo super tuner, tape deck digital tuner thing, which still worked. And that's probably where I'll stop and pass to Isabel. Oh, the pinstripe. Yeah. So again, the pinstriping was an option that the dealers supplied. So no two of them have got the same pinstripe unless they came from the same dealer. And with all the cars that were there, none of them had the same pinstripe as this one. Which we got replicated to be, what was on the car originally.
Just got my first job about 3 months prior, and I was starting to itch for a project. So I was going to trade me going Toyotas and manuals because I have a preference for gearboxes, and just budgeted like $2,000, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, and was throwing through. I was like, oh look, there's a Corolla here, possibly blown head gasket, did run. Maybe, and then this one's looking over my shoulder and he goes, oh yeah, hang on, give me a moment. Research as he does. And goes, actually, good, you should get that one. That's a really good car. It's got a really interesting history from what little I've looked at it. So some time later, and a few emails traded mostly on his part, bought it sight unseen for $1,500. $500 to one of his mates to drag it down from Auckland, and it arrived about, I think it was mid-April or so. It was raining, so that was a fun time getting wet on it off the trailer. It wasn't running at the guy didn't manage to get it running, which wasn't surprising given the fuel pump had carked it, which then given the state of the fuel tank as later found, not surprising. So yeah, got it down. Dad happened to be aware of it, and we behind the camera helped. I think you were there when we first got it running. Chucked a new fuel pump in it.
No, I missed out on the fuel pump stuff.
You missed out on
that.
that.
Later for the heat off.
Yeah. But first thing we did was obviously an oil change, and it came out a lovely brown color. Milkshake, color and consistency kind of matching. Glorious, yuck. Took the cam covers off, and it's like, oh yeah, that's just all the way through. So pretty much, yeah, head gasket blown, water into the oil. We changed out the fuel pump initially, and that got it running. So it's like, huzzah, it runs. So 290,000 K, 93,000 K. 93,000 K, blown head gasket, and good old Toyota still runs. Ran terribly because everything was shot from the clutch to the shocks. But that was good. And then, you do a bit and then you leave it, and then you do a bit and then you leave it, and then somebody went and found a reunion happening this year in Easter. And so 6 months ago we went, right. Okay, so we need to do some work. So we did that. So pretty much the last 6 months, we really knuckled down on it and got a whole lot of work through. So Dad did most of the firewall, kind of the entirety of it, up where the AC would go, and all in that. Just basically, April was just like, oh, look, pop. My whole hand has gone through. Okay. So he redid a lot of that, and a lot of, where else was there, Ross? It was mostly just on firewall that you did.
Yeah, so very heavily rotten, yeah, firewall up under the dash area, and then basically A-pillars right down into the sills, all what's in behind the guard. The doors were rotten, the front guards were rotten, there was a rust patch in the bonnet. Yeah, the whole roof had almost rusted through. It was pitted all over. I've got it in the way. Yeah. There's a hole around by the fuel cap where the boot latch is, the boot floor. Yeah, it had rust everywhere.
The rear hatch was fine.
Yeah, the rear hatch was fine, but yeah.
$1,500 for a rear hatch.
Yeah. Well, no, we've also paid $1,500 for stuffed CVs, stuffed shocks, yeah, dead fuel pump, dead battery, dead alternator, dead temperature gauge, dead fuel sender, yeah. Destroyed front seats.
It ate two fuel pumps.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fuel tank was full of this like sawdusty type looking stuff when they finally went around and sorted it. So the new fuel pump we put in to get it running in the year and a half since, it died. Haven't run, I think it was what, a whole 15 minutes, maybe 30. But yeah. So pretty much anything that could wear out had worn out, and we since replaced, including the clutch, which we suspect was probably the original one, given it was Toyota. And not long ago, you put up like the history of it, like the kilometers it done, and it looked like it got pretty steady use until about, was it 5 years ago?
Yeah, 2018, I think.
2018,
Blew the head
or so,
gasket.
which is about when it blew the head gasket and about when the last owner bought it.
Came up fuel tank.
So there was that. The it was the brake fluid on this as well.
Brakes were seized.
Yes, it was seized. But the brake fluid that came out was black,
Yeah.
and it settled out.
Yeah. Water.
And Dad to this day has never seen anything like it. But yeah, fully rebuilt, all four brakes and calipers. It's got new hoses, which had a hell of a time tracking down the replacement and rebuild kits. I have since rebuilt all the brakes, plus two of my old Tesla when they failed the warrant. Bizarre.
Okay.
So I unfortunately good at it. What else do we do? We mostly left the exterior bodywork for the panel shop, because Dad was of the opinion of, if I fuck it up, it's not my problem. But they did a marvelous job on that. As stated, the roof was very pitted, so I think the first one, I think it was not too long after, I spent, I don't know how much time with a wire brush and a drill just doing this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But honestly, it was getting annoying because every like 5 minutes it would spit the bit out. I'm like, no, I need that to stay. But you know, got there in the end and bombed it with spray paint in the meantime and rust kill. In terms of having to hunt bits down, didn't have to, but it took about 3 goes to get any replacement parts. Because you search up the number plate, I think it's, what is it?
Yeah, it's a February '87 car, and most records in '87 say it's this generation up.
Yeah.
And the parts they provide are the wrong ones. Despite you telling us it's body shell. So the car itself, despite all the rust in that, was 100% original, 100% complete, and never been crashed.
Yeah, so pretty much it took 3 goes to get any one part because you search the number, you give them the number plate, they think it's a different car. You give them the like a chassis number or something, they think it, obviously with New Zealand being the only one, they think it's got this other motor in it. So you're getting this belt and it's like, that's not gonna fit over 2 pulleys. We need one like twice the size. You also at the same time bought out, what was it, every rebuild kit in the country for this like Ripco was clearance in them for like a, what was it?
Yeah, the less performance motor of the 4A version, but it had the same sort of same pulley, same idler, same tensioner, just different belt, same crank seals, same cam seals. So for $12 a go, and then 60 odd bucks for a belt from Toyota, bargain.
Yeah, so did that. We had Edmund was at the time repainting a lot of the cam covers, so that's where those 2 shiny ones came from. And the surprising difference that makes to tidy the entire engine up.
Some really challenging things. Radiator hoses, unobtainium. I got one of them was one of the last two in Australia. Despite the fact that it was only the world's largest selling car, the engine mounts were an absolute nightmare. It has 4. I could get 2, and one of them has now got a Skyline suspension bush inserted into it after machining it. So it's just ridiculous how, parts that you think would be easy to get, long gone.
Yeah, but it was all complete. There was no hunting down obscure parts of interior or looking for a carpet that wasn't super warm. Even the carpet in this, once you gave it a good cleaning with the carpet cleaner thing you rent from like supermarket or Mitre 10 or wherever, that cleaned up pretty well. The rear seats are fine. We again, while he was away, I gave him a good rub down with this leather treatment, kind of like a balm. And it was just, every other night I'd come over and spend like an ungodly amount of time just trying to, and that actually worked quite wonders. It softened the seats up quite a bit. We had the original seats in for the reunion because we went, why not? But that's currently, those seats in there are the FX, the Japanese one. Seats have a remarkable amount of adjustment in them from it's like your back and then your face, and then it's also got lumbar support as well, the headrest too. The foam in the ones that came in this versus the Japanese ones is a lot firmer, and they're actually really comfy as well. The gearbox in this, again, Edmund who did the thing is somewhat jealous of because it shifts so nicely. Has a different biting point than what I'm used to, so I did stall a few times. And I got to remember it's only 5 gears, not 6. There's not a race mode. That's how you throw them. We don't do that. What else is there?
The panel shop she had the car for a month. It was supposed to be about 6 weeks and they're going to back burner it, but they had a slow period, so they blitzed it. The roof, as we said, the car had been parked up coastal under a car cover for 5 odd years, and the roof had just about rotted through. So Izzy got attacked that early on to sort of stop it getting worse. And then I went to check on it in the panel shop, and they actually bare metaled the roof because it was the best way to go. And they really went to town on it. And so it was Silverstone panel beaters. There's over 40 hours of bodywork went into it, which was the rust repair and the likes. The passenger door is original. We got replacement doors, but the replacement passenger door was not good either. And they said, actually, we're better off rebuilding the original one. And so the outer, much of the skin's been replaced. You can't tell. There's a big skin fix around the fuel tank. You can't tell. They've done some really outstanding bodywork. So the doors, apart from the passenger one, were all completely different colour. The guards are different colour again, and you can't tell because they did all the shuts. And I think, apart from the fact they're a good professional shop, but I think the guys enjoyed the chance to do something a little bit different with this collision repair. And they cut us a pretty good deal on it. It still cost a small fortune, but you can easily see where the time and the effort went. And so glad they did.
Yeah, so once we got it all back together, any part that we could, there was so much just sanding rust off, rust killing and spray painting it. We had a couple extra hands who was very happy just to sit there or stand and just go, me. Hey, I'm not complaining. But yeah, we swapped over for all the door innards and stuff. I think it was the driver's door, the winder. I think I went through. First one was broken, then I put the second one in, and then I think I spent a half hour trying to adjust it to get it so that the window would actually shut all the way easily. I ended up just loosening it all off, winding up and down a couple of times and tightening it and to do the job. So perhaps try that first. And then the bit that I found quite surprising was that when Dad took it in for a walk, is that it only failed on, I think it was headlight adjustment, and that was only because it was broken. So they couldn't adjust it then and there. So out of all the work and everything from the new CVs to everything else that was out with the bushing and shocks and everything else, still got original springs.
Yep.
We just cleaned those up. And then was it the next day after the retest, took it into the alignment, or was it the same day? So what's that? I think that's Bridgestone on High Street.
Yeah.
And apparently the guy there spent 2 hours adjusting that because the front struts, they have a, what's that? Camber. Camber adjustment. Second one, kind of like halfway up. But to do that, what was it? You have to take it off to adjust it a little bit, to chuck it back on, to then set the whole rig back up.
Yeah, so factory, there's 2 bolts between the strut and the knuckle, and the top's got an eccentric in it, and there's little graduations on it. And the code of manual says one graduation is 30 seconds of adjustment, but it doesn't say which way, and it's not obvious. And there's also, of course, there's a bit of clearance and slop, so it's not quite that simple. So yeah, 2 hours later, we got the camber right. And that was another joy. So the shocks were shot, couldn't get shocks for it. Got replacement struts. The struts arrived, and they don't have the camber adjustment in them. We want to retain that. Ended up going through multiple links, and ultimately talking to a KYB guy in Palmerston North, who's a bit of a guru. Said it's this part number. We got those, and once I machined them, they fit. So it's all these things again, where the number of components that were the 3rd or 4th item was the right one, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the end result was well worth it.
Yeah. As for how it drives and handles, as I mentioned earlier, the gearbox is like very nice. Again, engine's all original. It's numbers matching and everything. Engine, gearbox. It was a blown head gasket, except it was it the
Between water and oil.
Between the water and the oil by, I think it's
Number 4.
Fourth piston. So the actual piston ring itself was absolutely fine. And it still ran. It sounded horrible at the time, but it still ran. How did the oil filter look?
Fine.
Fine. So it's not.
Yeah, so the engine itself is actually very clean internally, despite having the blown head gasket and having sat for a long time like that. In effect, I think the gasket rotted, for lack of better terms. But there's the fire ring, that's all we want to call it, cylinder sealing ring, sort of compression. So our whole logic initially was to get it running to see if it was worth doing anything more with the engine or throwing another one in.
Here's this habit I've seen between the 2 cars I've had of, I'm not quite sure how this engine's going to go, but we'll chuck it in. If it blows up, we'll swap a different one. My Altezza still runs fine. This one runs fine. I'm not complaining. It does suffer from a wee bit of understeer, but that's more typical of front-wheel drives. I am also somewhat more used to a rear-wheel drive car, so rear-wheel drive and 6-speed. So not quite as used to it, and I will freely admit there are other people out there who can drive this better than me.
So we went up to Palmy for the reunion and by the wire wrapper, and Izzy drove it over the patio to a track, and I yelled at her when she took a 50k corner at 90, and it was a genuine 90.
I stayed on the road. I'm pretty sure I stayed within the line.
It just went round the corner, but but she didn't go that fast again on that trip.
He's a terrible passenger. That is why I slowed down. Terrible passenger. I'm a good driver. But yeah, no, it genuinely does drive pretty good. What else is there? Yeah, no central locking, so you're busy sitting on the side going, let me in, let me in, let me in. And then you get the keys and it's like, la-di-da-di-da. You can wait outside for a little bit. Pay that. Very spacious.
Yeah.
I'm kind of running out of things to say.
Yeah. Any questions?
Any questions?
What was the name of the panel shop?
Silverstream panel dealers. So this is the 5th car we've had there, but all the other jobs have been much smaller. This is the first time I've ever had a car externally painted, and yeah, we'll definitely go there again. Highly recommend them. Yeah, the bill for the paint and the panel prep was about 8.3, but like I say, when basically it's $100 an hour for labour, and we got much more than that worth of labour and stuff out of them. And again, it's a superb job. And I think, to be honest, you could have maybe saved $1,000 or so taking it elsewhere, but I doubt the result would have been anywhere near as good.
No, because they hung all the doors and then we took it back for them to do the rubbing strips and the pinstripes.
Yeah, that was extra, but
That was extra.
But again, well worth it. And the problem we had was once it came back from the panel shop, because it was literally, we stripped it right down. There was no glass in it or anything. It was just the bare shell, but it was rolling with most mechanicals in it. And it was like, well, we've now got a bar that we have to meet. So we pretty much tried to make the exterior kind of match, within reason. And like the bumpers are as they came. So we've been very fortunate with that. A number of the plastics, like the front indicators, I think have been replaced at some point. But things like the side indicators are unobtainable. If you look at the tail lights, looks like one of them was replaced at some point. You can't buy them, so like it is what it is. But we, as I said, we didn't set out to restore it. We set out to resurrect it. But because of the scale of the effort, it's come up a lot higher than, we expected.
You mentioned Chris Amon. Chris Amon can take a lot of credit for making Toyota what they are today.
Absolutely.
You read about the history of what he did with the company, and it's actually quite amazing.
So one of the really cool things was the event kicked off the reunion on Good Friday in Palmy, and we had to meet at the Space Our House car park, which is where we went for dinner the next night at 4 o'clock. And basically it was a mix and mingle till about 5, and then head off, and they gave us a route. And the hatchback's got one route and the liftback's got the other. And we basically converged on the square in Palmy going opposite directions around it. And then we headed out, and it took us out to Bunnythorpe. And then we went by back roads to Colipton, which, as it panned out, the road we took was effectively Chris Amon's test road that he used to use to prove the cars on. And apparently the Toyota had an arrangement with the Palmerston North City Council to not repair a pothole on a corner, because it was one that he used for making sure the suspension was right. And like with the development of them, they did high-speed testing on the runway at Paparam, and the front lip and that did indeed bring the front of the car down and make it work. So this was far more than just a marketing exercise. They really did sort of do it right.
And then they took what he did and put it to all the worldwide cars.
Yeah, but say this thing was saying, no one else got the front lip.
No.
And things like that. But yes,
Yeah, on potholes and corners, handles corners with potholes and other bumps very well. Like it is.
Even at 90k.
I don't know.
yes.
But like driver and passenger comfort is like in terms of potholes and things it's really nice. But I have low standards with my Altezas, so.
Yeah, again, all those little curious things, as I said before, about the hatchback and the liftback have different width rims. And part of it is the hatchback came with a 195 60/14 tyre, but the liftback came with a 175 65. Because apparently when you loaded this thing up, the tyres would rub. So they changed the tyre and the offset to suit.
And what size tires did you put on it?
Yeah, I got the wrong ones, but they don't rub. and apparently the other trouble with them is that if you get the 195 60s or 185 60s on this, you put the spare in the boot and the boot floor won't go down because it's too tall. But this one, it fits in. So I'm thinking, just the luck of the draw, the tyre, the mix of the profiles and things on them is sufficient that, the boot floor fits. Who would have thought? There you go. A different New Zealand built car.
You've also got to remember that if it's the same size floor pan as the liftback, it's quite possible that it was mixed and matched at the factory.
Oh, there's got no, yeah. I mean, well, no, it would, because this is longer. But yeah,
because when the batches came in, the TKD kits came in. They came in batches of 25. I don't know about Toyota, but it's likely because everybody else brought them in batches of 25. Then they were unboxed, stuck in piles, and if you're lucky, that batch received all the bits from that batch.
Yeah, that's certainly the impression. Like on the Saturday, we spent half the day at Toyota headquarters, and there were a couple of guys there who were involved in the build program and the development of them. And so they explained things like that where, they were quite adamant about the 20 for the GTs. But when I said, the numbers aren't consecutive, and they said, because what would happen was, the panels would get mixed up and out of sync.
Yeah.
So, two cars might have two different firewalls in them that are, 5 numbers apart. Yeah.
Yeah, and at that stage, there was a 40% over across the industry. There was a 40% New Zealand content requirement, which was basically radiator, battery, exhaust, seats, carpets, boot trim,
So
tyres.
close. So there's a list of the New Zealand content. Like I said, for the facelift, they upped it from the pre-facelift. So the battery was Exide, the carpet was Feltex, like you said. Door cards were Brugger.
Brugger.
The decals were 3M. Exhaust was Campbell Industries. The sound deadeners were Bostik. The glass was Pilkington. And so as we had it had a screen with a number of bullseyes, and the screen was brown tint, and the car's got a green tint. And when they took the screen out, it broke. We're going to replace it anyway. They managed to get a green tint for it, and one of the rear door quarter lights had been broken at some point, and it had a clear one in it. And luckily, the spare doors had a green tint, although it's got the number of that car etched into it, so that's how I got that in it. The paint was Dulux, and this is a waterborne system with a clear coat on it now. But they colour matched to under the bonnet the colour. I sprayed the engine bay and got that colour match as well. You can see it's different, but the external one is more accurate. Radiators, national radiators, seat covers were Brugger, leather supplied by Astley. The seat belts were Repco. Seat pads were Vitafoam. Seat frames were Brugger. Springs were Federal. Tyres were Firestone, and the wiring was F&P Allied. So like you say, quite a lot of New Zealand content.
Yeah. The one thing that would have been different on the Toyota than other cars would have been the wheels, because wheels were generally ex-CKD kit. The steel wheels were ex-CKD kit. And at least prior to this, almost nothing had come out off the line with a bag wheel. Not even the CKD kits, because we got really Billy Basic stuff here because of the high tariffs on imports. Everything apart from four wheels and a roof was an extra. As you say, radio, aircon was unheard of. It just didn't. Nobody had aircon. You've got windows for that. Radios were an extra. Leather seats, that was sort of, you were far too upmarket.
Safety,
So everything, all that stuff was Billy Basic. And it wasn't until the mid to late 80s that any of those extras were put on New Zealand cars, and that was when the Jappers were coming in, and they had a lot of fruit on them, and these guys had to match them, and they couldn't.